In addition to camping, we'll talk about shipbuilding, presidents' homes, crypts, World War II memes, and Indian chiefs. Plus, we'll get outside on this week's Camping with the Yankee Camper, Wompatuck State Park Campground. As the crow flies, Wompatuck is the closest campground to Boston that you can reach without needing a boat. Located in Hingham, Massachusetts, the park sits on land once owned by the Native American tribe for whom the state is named. As of June 2026, the campground is temporarily closed while several bathhouses complete much-needed renovations. It is expected to reopen, however, after July 1st. I was fortunate enough to stay here in May because I'd booked well in advance. And since the campground remained open to guests with existing reservations, I practically had the place to myself. Spanning more than 3,500 acres and offering around 250 campsites, Wompatuck is a great way to stay close to everything Boston has to offer while still feeling tucked away in the forest. The sites vary in size and can accommodate RVs up to 35 feet, with a few capable of handling rigs up to 40. Every site is priced the same, regardless of the size. For Massachusetts residents, campsites cost $17 per night. For out-of-state visitors, the rate jumps to $54. And that may seem steep, but it's comparable to what nearby private campgrounds charge, and there simply isn't another campground this close to Boston. Besides, Massachusetts always finds other ways to make up the difference in charging residents. Roughly half the campsites offer electrical hookups for an additional $6 per night. Each flat gravel site includes a 6-foot picnic table and a generously sized fire pit or ring. I will mention that the gravel made driving stakes to anchor the screenhouse challenging. Except for this unusual season, the campground normally operates from mid-May through Columbus Day in October. Reservations open 4 months in advance of arrival. There's also a 2-night minimum stay and a maximum of 14 cumulative camping days per season, whether consecutive or not. And yes, pets are welcome. Campers may bring up to 4 pets per site, though they have to remain leashed with leads no longer than 6 feet. Rabies vaccinations must also be current and presented at check-in. Obviously, Wompatuck is a Native American name, but the story behind it is worth telling. When Wompatuck, whose name means snow goose, was born, the English had been settled at Plymouth, roughly 30 miles to the south, for only 6 years. An additional 6 years later, his father, the leader of the Massachusetts tribe, died from smallpox. Josias Wompatuck, as he became known to the English, was then raised by his uncle Cutchamekan, who stepped into the role of sachem as regent following his brother's death. It was Cutchamekan who associated with Thomas Morton and even participated in the infamous Maypole festivities at Merrymount, though that's a story for another time. When Wompatuck was 28 years old, his uncle died, and the young Native American assumed the leadership of the Massachusetts tribe. Having grown up among the English, and later converting to Christianity as a praying Indian, Wompatuck understood the tactics of unscrupulous colonial opportunists. During land negotiations, he worked to ensure his people received fair compensation. On July 4th, 1665, the town of Hingham was established on land purchased at a fair price from Josias Wompatuck. More than 3 centuries later, in 1969, the land became part of Massachusetts' effort to preserve natural spaces, and in 1973, the park was officially dedicated in honor of the man who had once led the indigenous people of this region. Wompatuck State Park also carries a significant military history. The site once served as a supply and storage area, supporting ships being built for the United States Navy at the nearby shipyards. Even today, a number of underground bunkers remain scattered throughout the park, silent reminders of the munitions once stored here before vessels headed out to sea. This role became especially important during World War II, which makes you wonder, was Kilroy here? About 15 to 20 minutes away are two former shipyards operated by Bethlehem Steel during World War II. At one, in Hingham, you can catch the ferry to Boston, which I'll talk about a little later. At the other in Quincy, you can visit the United States Naval Shipbuilding Museum aboard the USS Salem. Now known as the Quincy Shipyard, this was the historic Four River Shipyard where ocean-going vessels were built for more than 100 years. Between the Hingham and Quincy locations, sitting on the opposite shores of the Weymouth Back River, hundreds of steel ships were produced to support the Allied war effort during World War II. Touring the Salem allows visitors to better understand what life was like aboard a heavy cruiser carrying more than 1,600 sailors tasked with protecting American interests and Democratic allies during a time of global conflict. Although the ship itself was launched after the war ended, the Salem was ordered while the conflict was still at its peak and is one of the best available examples of the ships being deployed at that time. Like most naval vessels of this size, it functioned as a floating city, complete with barbershop, medical facilities, print shop, machine shop, dining halls, and even a geedunk, the Navy term for a snack bar. On larger ships, it was common practice to install ice cream machines to help maintain morale. Ice cream became such a prized commodity at sea that crews sometimes traded it with smaller vessels in exchange for needed supplies. Munitions for ships like these were transported from the bunkers at the nearby Naval Ammunition Depot, the same property that is now Wompatuck State Park Campground. 3 ships connected to the Four River Shipyard can still be visited within roughly 50 miles of one another. The USS Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., and the battleship Massachusetts, better known as Big Mammy, are both berthed at Battleship Cove in Fall River. Visitors can tour all 3 ships at a discounted rate using the Kilroy Pass. I first learned about Kilroy, the same place many kids growing up in the late 1960s and early 70s got their education, Saturday morning television. But did you know that Kilroy Was Here may have been the world's first viral meme? During World War II, the phrase appeared all over the globe, often accompanied by a drawing of a bald-headed man with a large nose peering over a wall. The image itself was likely adapted from earlier British graffiti featuring Mr. Chad, usually paired with the phrase, "What, no?" followed by rationed items like cheese, meat, or beer. So how did Kilroy become a worldwide phenomenon? American GIs began marking buildings, vehicles, and equipment with the phrase and symbol to show that U.S. forces had already been there. The markings appeared across Europe, the Pacific, and nearly everywhere American troops were deployed. To the soldiers who followed, it served as a reminder that they were not alone in the fight against tyranny. It became a symbol suggesting there was nowhere the American military could not reach. The legend likely has its roots here at the Four River Shipyard. Troops crossing the Atlantic reportedly noticed "Kilroy was here" written in strange, hard-to-reach locations deep inside the newly constructed ships. Although probably mistaken as graffiti, those markings had been left behind by a shipyard inspector named James Kilroy. Kilroy worked for Bethlehem Steel as a senior rivet inspector, responsible for verifying that bulkheads had been properly sealed and that workers were only paid for completed work. After checking a section, he would mark it with the words, "Kilroy was here," to prevent duplicate inspections. Because wartime ships were being built at an astonishing pace, sometimes as quickly as one every 12 days. Many interior spaces were never painted before deployment. As a result, the markings remained visible throughout the ships in unusual locations to sailors and troops as they crossed the Atlantic and possibly the Pacific, carrying thousands of servicemen. Eventually, American military personnel combined the phrase with the familiar Mr. Chad drawing, and an icon was born, one that spread across the world during the war years and even occasionally appears to this day. There's even two Easter eggs of Kilroy Was Here at the World War II National Memorial in Washington, D.C. But as for the Four River Shipyard, there's no question about it. Kilroy was here. Now you know. Let me tell you about the amenities at the campground. Making these videos is hard work, and I don't receive any compensation. I do this for you. What I do for me is I drink coffee. You could buy me a cup. I'll put the link right here. Thank you for watching. Now let's get back to the video. The facilities offered are more than adequate for those who are familiar with camping in public-owned parks. As I mentioned, 4 of the bathhouses are currently undergoing complete renovations and upgrades, so what you see here is the older one slated for a later upgrade. There are 4 sinks with mirrors, and the water got warm when you let it run. In the men's room are 3 toilet stalls plus a urinal. These were all neat and clean, and none of the stalls were marked up with graffiti. One of the stalls has been modified to meet ADA compliancy. I assume that the ladies' room has 4 stalls. One thing that drives me nuts is when the door won't lock for privacy, but I checked all of the stalls, and they were in very good condition. Not necessary on the electric sites, but there is power located in the bathroom, on the wall, and next to the sinks. Opposite the sinks are hand dryers, which are very convenient and don't leave a paper towel mess. And speaking of messes, the sign reminds everyone to keep the bathroom clean. There's 3 shower stalls, and all of them appear to be well maintained. One is ADA compliant. The water pressure was good, and it quickly came up to a comfortable warm, though not hot, temperature. Each of the stalls had 3 large hooks for keeping clothes off the floor. Not roomy, but again, adequate. The park manager stressed to me that it was his priority to keep the bathrooms neat and clean, and a posted schedule outside the door shows how often the restroom is cleaned and checked. Also outside is a bicycle rack to help keep the area clear of obstructions. Fresh water is available throughout the loops at very well marked and newer looking spigots attached to blue poly pipes. Always a good sign that the water isn't contaminated from rusty plumbing. The handle turned easily with one hand, important when trying to fill a container, and the pressure was very good. The spigots are strategically placed to cover about every 6 to 8 campsites. Massachusetts bans bringing firewood in from the outside and must be purchased from the park office. I ordered 2 bundles when I booked, and it was ready when I checked in. The cost is $7 per bundle, which aligns with what most grocery stores charge and is less than many gas stations. I had to split mine a little smaller, so I recommend bringing a hatchet and practicing before going out. I will say that the wood burned very cleanly. The website states that there are dish sinks behind the bathhouse. I didn't see them, but really didn't go looking. What are located near the bathhouses, however, are the dumpsters, which seemed adequate, but I suppose these could get filled on a busy holiday weekend. As I said, there was very few people staying while I was there, and it wasn't a problem. Also located just outside the bathhouse entrances is a recycling bin, and when I inquired, I was instructed I could leave my empty 1-pound propane cylinders here, placed beside it. For RVers, there's also a dump station near the exit on the non-electric side of the campground. This is bi-directional with a center island. Like the rest of the park, it too looked like it was well maintained. I was very impressed with the upkeep of the campground. I'll tell you about some of the activities available with your campground purchase, but first, let me tell you about a unique opportunity to recognize America's 250th birthday. So far, there's only one city in the United States that can boast that two presidents were born there. Likewise, there's only one city that can claim two presidents are buried there, and it's the same city. Quincy, Massachusetts, less than a half an hour drive from the campground, is the birthplace of both the second and sixth presidents of the United States. Although not born in the same house, their birthplaces stand only 75 feet apart. The Adams family owned the property for 220 years, from when it was purchased by Deacon John Adams until 1940, when it was donated to the city of Quincy by the Adams Real Estate Trust, and in 1979, both houses were transferred to the National Park Service. I visited these homes in April of this year. The older of the two was built in 1681 by a prominent early settler of the area, then part of Braintree. In 1720, Deacon John Adams purchased the house, along with 6 acres to till and provide for his future family. In 1734, he married Susanna Boylston, the daughter of a prominent Boston merchant and niece of Dr. Zabdiel Boylston, the first physician to perform smallpox inoculations in America. John Sr. and Susanna raised 3 sons on the farm: John, Peter, and Elihu. Over the years, John Sr. expanded the family holdings considerably, eventually acquiring neighboring properties and additional farmland. When the deacon died in 1761, the estate was divided among his sons. Through a somewhat complicated inheritance, future President John Adams came to own the neighboring house while continuing to live in the home where he had been born. He remained there with his mother and brother until marrying Abigail Smith in 1764. Feeling the need for an office in which to work, John added space to the rear of the house and relocated the kitchen there. He also added a separate entrance into the old kitchen, which he converted into his law office. It was in this room that he met with clients as his legal practice expanded, and it was here that he wrote much of the Massachusetts Constitution, which remains the oldest functioning written constitution in the world and served as an important model for portions of the United States Constitution. It was also in this house that all 6 of John and Abigail's children were born, although only 4 lived to adulthood. This is the place where Abigail would read John's love letters while he served as a delegate to the Continental Congress, and it was from here that both she and 7-year-old John Quincy could hear the cannons of the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of 1775. They climbed Penn's Hill to watch the smoke and fighting from the battle, fought primarily on nearby Breed's Hill some 10 miles away. Abigail remained at home while John traveled to Europe on diplomatic missions during the Revolution. On his second voyage, he took young John Quincy with him. He returned briefly after about a year and a half, but soon departed again, joining Benjamin Franklin in efforts to secure funding and support for the American cause. After the war, Abigail and daughter Nabby joined John and John Quincy in London, where he served as the first United States Minister Plenipotentiary to Great Britain. In 1787, Abigail convinced her husband to purchase a 60-acre property, sight unseen, that she remembered from her childhood. The family returned to Braintree the following year, only to discover that it was much smaller than she remembered as a child and needed considerably more work than either expected. Abigail dubbed it a wren's nest and thought it no more comfortable than a barracks. Nevertheless, John anticipated a quiet retirement there and immediately set about improving the property. The following January, however, he was elected the nation's first vice president and temporarily moved to New York City. He would not return to live in Braintree full-time for another 12 years. Abigail fulfilled duties we would today associate with a second lady, though that title would not come into common use until much later. She spent time in both New York and Philadelphia, the nation's transitional capitals, but frequently returned to the farm in Massachusetts because of bouts of rheumatism and to oversee the renovations being made to the property. In 1797, John named the grounds Peacefield to commemorate the peace he had helped secure through his diplomatic work with Great Britain. In 1800, John and Abigail became the first residents of the unfinished White House as President and First Lady. After his unsuccessful bid for a second term, they retired permanently to Peacefield. In 1803, John Quincy purchased both his birthplace and the neighboring Adamsburg home from his father, helping to manage the family's extensive holdings while also providing financial assistance to his parents. He and his family spent several summers there when he was not serving in Washington as a United States Senator. Abigail contracted typhoid fever and died in the fall of 1818 after suffering poor health for a number of years. John lived more than 7.5 years longer, but also struggled with declining health. During their years in national politics, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had become bitter rivals, thanks in large part to their mutual friend Benjamin Rush of Pennsylvania, another signer of the Declaration of Independence. The two men reconciled and maintained a remarkable correspondence for 14 years. By the summer of 1826, John Adams was failing rapidly, but remained determined to see the 50th anniversary of the nation he had helped create. On July 4th, he could hold on no longer and passed away, his final words reportedly being, "Thomas Jefferson survives." However, he was mistaken. The third president had died more than 5 hours earlier. John was originally buried beside Abigail in the cemetery across from the church where he'd been baptized. In fact, it was Reverend John Hancock, father of the future patriot and governor, who performed the baptismal sacrament. It's interesting to note that John Adams and John Hancock, both natives of Braintree, knew each other from childhood and remained friends. In 1825, John Quincy moved into yet another house in which his father had lived, that being the White House. Around the time of Adams' death, the church, one of the earliest Unitarian congregations in America, decided to replace its aging wooden structure with one built of stone. John Quincy Adams persuaded the builders to include a crypt below the new church as a place of honor for his parents. There they were reinterred and were later joined by John Quincy and his wife, Louisa Catherine. The crypt remains open to history enthusiasts daily within the United First Parish Church, often called the Church of Presidents. All of these properties can be explored today, where you can learn far more about these fascinating people and the lives they led than I could possibly include in this short segment. I hope you'll consider visiting them, and I'll put links in the description section. Most of all, as we head towards celebrating 250 years of independence, I hope this has sparked your interest in these remarkable people and the role they played in shaping our nation. Now you know. As I get back to the campground, let me tell you about some of the other things you can do. At the Visitor Center, you can see a display with a copy of the original deed for Old Braintree signed by Wompatuck in 1665. You can also get park information here. Next to the building is a small children's play area with a climbing structure and an upright whirling apparatus known as a spinami. Other outdoor recreation includes hiking with over 20 distinct trails, 15 of which are classified as easy. There's also 12 miles of paved, non-motorized bike paths and a number that are more challenging. Also, if you need to do some maintenance to get out there, repair posts are scattered throughout the park with a variety of retractable bicycle tools to assist. For water sports, although swimming isn't an option, you can fish from the dock. Just be sure to get the appropriate license. Or you can put in a kayak or canoe from the boat launch. This allows easy access to get out on the water. There's also a small picnic area with a bike rack. The Erin River Reservoir is a 136-acre body of water. The reservoir itself is a Class A water supply source used as a backup for the town of Cohasset. It's also possible to drive into the area with your vehicle. The ramp is just under a mile from the turnoff on a paved fire road. There is a locked gate, however. You can get a key for the lock from the campground ranger station, but you'll have to leave your license as collateral. And speaking of watercraft, about 15 minutes away by car is the ferry that will take you into Boston. The boat runs about every hour, starting at 8 a.m., and returns similarly, with the last one leaving at 9:50, but be sure to check the schedule. The cost is just under $10 one way, plus parking will run you an additional $5. This is a cash-only parking lot, so go prepared. This is also the location of the Information Center for the Department of Conservation and Recreation for Boston Harbor Islands if you're interested in spending time out there. Maps and more information is available on the DCR website. If you found this information helpful, give it a thumbs up. To keep informed about new videos I post every week, be sure to be subscribed. And if there's anything you'd like to share, leave a question or remark in the comments section. I try to respond to every one. That's it for this video. If everything goes smoothly, I'll see you on Thursday when I make breakfast burritos in my mess kit, plus share some background on Duncan. In the meantime, I hope you get outside, and thank you for watching.